Take one. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the IFAT series, Looking Back. This series looks back at artists or albums that were staples in our community and in some way affected our lives. We offer a personal review on how that artist or album deserves a second look. I am your host, Pamela D, and in this episode, we will look back on an artist whose voice has resonated and resounded with many in the industry and those who are simply genuine fans, despite the repeated challenges and prejudices faced by this artist. One of those fans is our IFATS member, Charles Perkins. Charles became aware of this artist while watching an episode of The Cosby Show. That artist was Jimmy Scott.
Where did you find that album?
Well, Sandra and I were in the record store, and there it was.
James Victor Scott was born on July 17, 1925, in Cleveland, Ohio. As with most artists of that era, prior to their career, Scott sang in the church choir. He would often sing by his mother's side because she was a piano player and he had this wonderful voice. She knew it. She knew he was something special. However, at the age of 13, his mother was killed by a drunk driver, and that would affect Jimmy for the rest of his life. So when his career began to take off, it was Lionel Hampton that gave him the nickname Little Jimmy Scott. And it was given this because, Hampton thought he looked so young and he was short and slight of build. And there's a reason for that. Charles would discover that Jimmy Scott suffered from a condition called Kalman's syndrome. Kalman syndrome is a rare genetic disorder that limited Jimmy to the height of 4 feet and 11 inches. And then it also prevented him from experiencing the classic puberty, and it left him with a very high voice. It almost sounds similar to a woman's voice. And many times he was also mistaken for a woman on many classic songs that he recorded. So while with Lionel Hampton, Scott would record the song called Everybody's Fool. And it was then that Charles would, through his research, find that Jimmy was never really credited with that song. Now, this would happen again when he recorded the song Embraceable You, which he recorded with jazz legend Charles Parker. His name was left off that record. Now, the reason that people left his name off the records, and when I say people, I'm talking about record executives and those big wigs who think they know everything. They left his name off because he sounded like a woman. And at that time, there was a huge prejudice against any type of slight of femininity in a man. So with that, Scott was never given credit for those particular songs. So in 1963, Ray Charles wanted to record with Jimmy Scott. He wanted this guy to have an album because he knew the talent of Scott. So in 1963, they were working on a particular album. Now, the album is called Falling in Love is Wonderful. However, the album was withdrawn while Scott was on his honeymoon because he had signed a contract with a record label owner named by the name of Herman Lubisky. It would be 40 years before that album was reissued. Now, Scott disputed the contract he had with Lubinsky, who had loaned him to Sid Nathan at King for 45 recordings in 1957 and 1958. Another album called The Source was recorded in 1969, released in 1970, but due to another Lubinsky threat of breach of contract, it was not promoted by Atlantic and quickly went out of print. Scott's career would fade. He was heartbroken, demoralized, and just plain disgusted with this treatment. Treatment that would have never been given to the likes of Sinatra, Mel Torme, or Bing Crosby. So for a while, Scott did what he had to do. He found himself working as a shipping clerk, a hospital orderly, and even an elevator operator. It wasn't until 1989 that there seemed to be a light at the end of that proverbial tunnel. So when Scott was singing at the funeral of a friend of his, another songwriter saw and heard him and decided, hey, listen, it's time. Let's get this guy back in the studio and give him the justice that he deserves. So what would happen is you would have the recording of an album called All the Way. Scott would eventually record 2 more albums in 1994 and in 1996, but it was during the All the Way album that he gained new admirers and fans such as Lou Reed, Madonna, and Bruce Springsteen. These were artists that were beginning to experience what Billie Holiday, Nancy Wilson, Ray Charles, and Dinah Washington already knew, that this could only be a voice that came from heaven. In fact, years earlier, Billie Holiday had stated how much she loved Jimmy Scott. She was a true fan, and he was her absolute favorite singer. Scott would go on to cover songs by Prince, Elton John, and Simply Red. He would also perform at the 1993 inauguration of President Clinton. Now, earlier in the 1950s, what many may not know, Jimmy Scott also performed at the inauguration for Dwight D. Eisenhower. What Charles Perkins would like listeners to know is how an artist who had immense vocal talent could not be given full recognition during the earlier parts of his career while still young. He was denied this because of something he didn't have any control over. And yet, with this guy Lubinsky, he was just plain greedy. Had Scott been able to have the album Falling in Love released on the Tangerine label, his career would have been far different than working as an elevator operator. That album would not be released until Scott was 76 years old. Charles encourages us to take the time and listen to the wonderful recordings of an artist who still understood what it was to survive despite all that was taken from him. I'm Pamela D, and I thank you for listening.
Somebody's fool. The world is the biggest school. As you live, you learn. Though a torch you'll burn. Everybody's somebody's fool. You go through life making fools of others, pretending you're giving them love. But remember, sisters and brothers, you all have to answer to the one up above.